In this chapter, we are going to deal with some atypical things, coincidences or causalities, that happened on that fateful but strange January 27th, 1993, when the bodies of the three young women appeared. Let's start with one of the parts that particularly surprised me the most during this investigation. As we see in previous chapters, in Valencia, the newly formed UCO, the Central Operational Unit of the Civil Guard, had been in charge of the investigation for weeks. A body with the best prepared agents to investigate and prosecute the most serious criminals and organized crime. Well, on January 26, 1993, a very strange or casual decision was made. The UCO operative sent to Valencia to investigate the case was sent to Madrid, to be replaced by another group, thus rotating the personnel. Inexplicably, instead of waiting in Valencia for said agents, the corresponding relief, they were made to move to the capital, and from there the new contingent will depart, leaving Valencia without any member of the UCO for about 16 hours. 16 hours in which, due to paradoxes of fate, if we want to call it that, the bodies of the three girls appeared. If to this, we add that no one notified the authorities of said body of the appearance of the bodies, and that the person in charge found out about it from a relative who had just seen it on TV. Everything sounds a little bizarre. This meant that until January 28th, no member of the UCO could investigate the grave, at which time the bodies were already unearthed on the autopsy table. If we continue with these coincidences or causalities, it is worth highlighting another fact of the people who, in the end, had the responsibility of carrying out the removal of the bodies. Let's explain one thing. The Civil Guard was consisted of two departments at that time, the Department of Crimes Against Persons and the Department of Economic Crimes, each of them with agents prepared and instructed for this purpose. On the day the girls appeared, that January 27th, all the agents of the Department of Crimes Against Persons were on rest, so they had to turn to the Economic Crimes Unit, which was at that time on the other side of Valencia, showing some photographs to the employees of a bank branch in order to identify some robbers. This creates a basic problem, and it is the following. The personnel who had the most important task, or one of the most important in this crime, which is the removal with all that this entails of the bodies of the three girls, had done nothing similar during their entire career, since their work had nothing to do with this type of crime. But let's continue, because if this in itself seems at least peculiar to be a random event, there are still more things that will seem at least paradoxical to you. When the two beekeepers arrive at the barracks, and always based on their own words, can't go up to the grave because there are no vehicles available. And it is after spending several hours when two men dressed in black appear in a dark car, and Aquino is in charge of guiding these two people to the burial place. These men never speak to Aquino. They never identify themselves. Simply when they arrive at the grave, they give a civilian like him, a person without training and without authorization of any kind, some latex gloves so that he can look for evidence of a crime. How many times do you have seen that a person who doesn't belong to the state security forces has been in charge of looking for evidence of a crime? In fact, it is Aquino who casually finds the first pieces of paper on with the name of Enrique Angles and his address. This is the only clue that put him in the place. Let's make a small aside at this moment, and let's talk about the papers that Aquino finds. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of the girl's murderer. At the foot of the grave, he has just killed and buried three young people. And there is no other place in the world where throwing away some torn-up papers with his home address that directly incriminate him. We're not talking about accidentally dropping them, like you can drop a wallet, for example. We're not just talking about tearing them up. He will tear them up and throw them away intentionally. And now, assuming that the murderer of the three girls is, at least the most careless murderer in history, as is possible, that some papers in a place that, as verified by the meteorological service, had rained and winds had blown almost like hurricanes, were still there to be found, not by specialized agents, but by a beekeeper, to whom they gave the responsibility of looking for evidence in a triple crime. If we continue with these two people dressed in black, at one point in Aquino's statement, he says that they show him a denim jacket and three belts. A jacket and belts that, on the other hand, the beekeeper says, that at no time does he see how he finds them, but they directly show them to him, and immediately afterwards, this individual exclaims, "I already know who is buried here, the three missing girls from Alcasser, because this jacket is Tony's, and these belts belong to each of the girls." How can this statement be made, when in addition, none of those objects belong to any of the girls? Let's continue with another of those casual acts that fate had prepared for us, so that on the day, the person in charge of making the photographic report turns out to come to the scene only with one film roll. We can call ourselves a lack of foresight or laziness. But there is even more. This leads to a series of consequences that we will see below. As according to him, he didn't have any more film to take photos. He decides to take all the objects that have appeared in the scene, and instead of photographing them in the place where they appear, as must be done to carefully document the entire scene, he decides to put them together and make a single portrait in order to save photographs, with which we lose perspective of how said scene was at the time of the investigation. But if you thought that this was all regarding the photographer, I am sorry to tell you that no, there is even more. When the excavation begins to unearth the bodies, said person, instead of photographing step by step how they appear, and the characteristics that present the bodies, to have a wide recreation of the grave and the corpses found in it. He comments that the people that has to dig up were very tired, and that he, since he is a good companion, decided to leave the camera aside and goes into the grave to help dig. If we take into account, as both the beekeepers and the morticians said in their statement, if the girls were almost at ground level, and even so, there were a multitude of people to carry out this act, without having to leave aside the photographic report, which would have shed a lot of light on how these girls were buried. Well, this was not like that. There is no photograph of the girls in the grave, of their position, of how they appeared, or of how they were extracted. There is nothing, no graphic document that can support any statement, and everything, because the person in charge, always according to his statements, believed it was more important to help excavate than to document. And I wonder, is this decision made by that person? Or is it the investigating judge of the case and the survey who is responsible, which must guide the photographer so that he documents everything scrupulously, be that as it may. This was done like this, and that is what we have. Therefore, the saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Unfortunately, in this case, we can't apply it, because there are many words, but very few images. I also want to mention that in the report prepared by the judge's secretary, objects are missing, which on the other hand, do appear in the report prepared by the civil guard, and that thanks to this controversy in the objects found, some of them couldn't be admitted at the time of the trial, because only the report of said secretary was taken as valid, leaving aside that of the civil guard in relation to the states of the bodies, their heads, and along etc. that the coroner names during the ocular inspection. We will talk about it at the time of the autopsies. That is why I am not going to delve into this point. But I do want to mention something else that happened that day, and that perhaps some think that could not influence the way in which the pickup bodies at La Romana was carried out. But for others, and knowing the character of the person we are going to talk about, perhaps some of the anomalous or strange situations that occurred would not have occurred of being present. Curiously, the day before the girl's appearance, a British journalist who lived in Valencia and who had taken the trust of Fernando Garcia, Miriam's father, made him on January 26th, together with Tony's older sister, travel to England, as I already mentioned in the second chapter, to appear on an interview for the BBC. Therefore, the person who had moved heaven and earth, who had kept the flame of the search alive in all the media, and who had managed to make this event, if not the most high-profile event in Spain, then one of the most high-profile events. He was thousands of kilometers away at the most crucial and important moment of those 75 days of anguish. According to Fernando Garcia himself, and always based on his words, everything was orchestrated so that he would not be in Valencia that fateful day, and that he would find out about the discovery of the bodies by chance when he called a journalist to cancel an interview that he had arranged for the next day. But I better let you listen, as he tells it.
Fui a hacer a Londres fue después de haber imprimido en 5 idiomas, así como 20.000 carteles y haberlo distribuido por medio mundo, pues fui a Londres con el objetivo de apoyar aquella campaña de tirada de carteles a través de los medios de comunicación extranjeros. Y allí fue donde yo contacté allí con una cadena de televisión, con la BBC, y entonces me propusieron algo que para mí fue estupendo, el ir repartiendo carteles con un equipo de televisión por pubs y discotecas londinenses donde la gente joven frecuentaba y hacer un reportaje para darlo en televisión. Me pareció una idea estupenda y yo tenía aquí en España al día siguiente una entrevista con Diego Carcedo, que era el presidente de Euronews, y venía a Radio Nacional a Valencia Yo llamé por teléfono para posponer la entrevista con él y llamé a Radio Nacional. Entonces me dijeron que no me podían atender porque había sucedido algo muy importante y que estaban en ello, que la niña de Alcácer habían aparecido. Y la persona que había cogido el teléfono me dijo eso, no sabía quién era yo y me colgó.
Qué barbaridad.
Volví a llamar otra vez a Radio Nacional, contacté de nuevo, dije, me identifiqué quién era yo y dijo, bueno, usted ha llamado antes, sí. Pues es que resulta que las niñas creo que han aparecido.
Well, after these words and everything that I have told you in this chapter, it is clear that, in this life, it seems that at certain moments, some events that, for some, may seem coincidental, align in some strange way. But for someone else, more than casual, they are causal. I am no one to say if everything is part of an orchestrated plan, or if it is simply a chance of fate. I believe that it is up to each of you to analyze the official facts and make this decision.